I'm Jim Check.
I'm Renee Merrifield.
Here we are with Beyond the Ballot, and Beyond the Ballot, never more salient than now, right? Beyond the Ballot. Like, everything is about the ballot. Everybody wants your vote right now. It's
Absolutely.
a wild and crazy time for sure. But we're going to start in BC. As usual, we'll start off here in BC. And we got a little clip here first from Premier David Eby. We're going to run that clip and then we'll comment on it after.
Yesterday that our softwood lumber industry is facing a doubling of tariffs. We sold about $7 billion of lumber to the United States last year. It's 1 in 10 sticks of lumber used in the United States. Those are going up probably by about 50% in cost for Americans as a result of this new import tax. Obviously, huge anxiety among timber producers in British Columbia and in Canada as a result of this. And it comes after the new taxes on importing car parts and cars to the United States, which will add about $5,000 to the cost of a car in the United States. We have people who feel that they get further and further away from break even at the end of each month. These are anxieties that are shared, unsurprisingly, between Canadians and Americans. But I can tell you that if I put a 50% tax on building materials coming into British Columbia, I wouldn't last long in office. And that's what we're trying to communicate to the president, to Americans is, look, we're providing what you need, what you can't get from other places. We provide critical minerals here. China's cut off access to germanium, which you need for the defense industry. It only comes from British Columbia. And so let's work together on these key issues. There's really no point in us fighting each other. It just raises costs for Americans. And that's the point of the billboards and the messages we're trying to deliver to Americans.
There you go. He's on the devil. He's on Fox News. I thought the NDP and the Liberals thought that was where the devil lives.
I think they do, but I think they're trying to talk to the devil, at least in their minds. At least in their minds. But he's bang on, and I got to give him credit for really trying to utilize the different communication channels to reach those that are going to be impacted by these tariffs, and we know in the housing industry that he's absolutely correct. The worst thing that we could do is retaliate. And when he's talking about putting a retaliatory tariff on on building materials that are coming from the states, that would be a really, really devastating blow to not the housing industry necessarily in Canada, but to the end user, whether that's a renter because the cost of building rentals will go up, or whether that's someone trying to purchase a first home.
Yeah, and I also have to commend him too because he's dialed back the rhetoric and he's talking more reasonable. Because at the first, like the rhetoric is not going to help with a guy like Trump, right? Who's very he just responds to rhetoric. You know what I mean? Like it just gets worse. So talking reasonable makes a lot of sense, and I think it's a calmer way to deal with the stress. And it actually calms down people in British Columbia, right? That sounds better than screaming rhetoric about tariffing or taxing trucks coming in and, blocking the border and all that kind of stuff and tanks rolling in the streets.
Yeah, I think that the only thing that I would add to what he's saying is I don't believe that Trump responds to public pressure. I think EB responds to public pressure. I think that when the public gets loud about something, we've watched as EB removed something that he vehemently agreed with, and we heard his speeches in the past about how about whether it's name calling or whether it's just his support of the carbon tax, and then for him to remove it on April 1st. I think that he responds to public pressure. I do not think that Trump responds to public pressure in that same way, and I'd be surprised if we saw this result in meaningful change. But at least he's trying a different way.
I would say it's a more reasonable way for sure than the other way. And it makes more sense because it is these tariffs. Many economists have said it. These tariffs hurt his people, not our people. You know what I mean? Like it could be some job, but develop other markets. But I think the forestry sector has a lot of problems that we need to internally fix. And we've done so many stories on it. And you and I have talked about it endlessly too, about access to fiber and all those things, and getting permitting and all those things. If they want to really help the forestry sector, fix those things so that companies like Canfor think British Columbia is worth investing in again.
Yeah, and make it more efficient, right? And less costly to do business in BC. So EB has not fixed any of that. I think I drew attention to the fact that there are no new pieces of legislation in the House right now that deal with the forestry sector. Right now, it's mostly focused on giving him, unlimited powers throughout this season. And the budget. So we don't see a lot of help coming for the forestry sector, and this is going to be a big blow for them. However, I have seen some, whether it's on Reels or TikTok or social media channels, where I've actually seen some Americans doing the analysis of how much of the lumber comes from Canada and why the tariffs don't make sense in terms of housing prices and how those are going to go up in the US. So I do think that there are others that are also championing this cause.
And then the big one that happened just after we did our show last week, two rating agencies downgraded BC debt again, and that's not great for British Columbia. Not great at all, right?
I want to say that I was wrong about this, but I was bang on. And I said, this is the next thing that's going to happen. When a province runs as large of a deficit as we are running right now, especially with no hope in sight, you look at those deficit numbers that are predicted for the next 3 years, they're in the $11 billion almost every single year. With the difference in the carbon tax and having removed the carbon tax, that number is going to go into the 14 billion. And how does this affect everyday British Columbians? It makes our debt more expensive. These downgrades make it like you have to go to a second tier lender now to get your money. So it's going to cost British Columbians more. And I think if we remember in the budget, if interest payments were a ministry, it would be the fourth largest ministry in BC right now. This is only going to exacerbate that further. And I think we're in some really, really muddy and rocky waters economically because of it.
Yeah, and if you think of it as a homeowner, that's like your interest rates went up and more of your principal goes towards paying the debt than goes to the point where you can't even service the debt, right? That's the big problem. And in the rating agencies, some of their explanation there is that they don't see a lot of hope in getting out of it too. That's the big part in there, because like as an accountant, like you can either increase revenues or decrease expenses. The NDP don't like to decrease expenses. And capital's been flowing out of British Columbia, so they're kind of like stuck on both ends of that equation. Revenues aren't going to increase, and expenses they don't seem to want to cut.
And the revenues are being predicted by the NDP to be decreasing. It's not even that we've got a stable revenue line item. That revenue line item is actually decreasing. They're predicting less in the front coming from the forestry sector. They're predicting less coming from the mining sector. So we've got some real detrimental. I mean, we had more revenue coming from tobacco tax than we did from the forestry sector. Those line items are not anything to be proud of when you're talking about an economy. And I think that the agencies are, the rating agencies are really waking up to that and saying, BC, you got to get your fiscal act together. Now, what was really surprising to me is that all of the latest budgets over the course of the last 4 years that the NDP has put out have really, gone relatively unscathed from any mainstream media attention or analysis. This one has not. And these downgrades have been very, very covered by mainstream media. You've got Von Palmer and Rob Shaw, who both wrote very negative articles about it. And then you've got, Minister Josie Osborne with the Ministry of Health coming in with an efficiency person that's going to look after everything, and that was Penny Ballum, who's going to get paid $400,000 to do the job. Now it's unfortunate she's already been paid $1.8 million to actually create the system that she's going to look for efficiencies within. So even when you're talking about cost cutting in the budget, this NDP government just hasn't shown that they know how to do it as of yet.
And the other choice they have is to squeeze the taxpayer a little bit more. But in the number of years, around 9 years that they've been in power, 33 new taxes. So not much room to squeeze the taxpayer anymore as well.
Especially because the taxpayer's leaving. The taxpayer, we've seen outward migration surpass inward migration on the interprovincial side. So we already know that people are leaving. And then you've got the jobs numbers. I mean, BC losing, 5,800 jobs in the last in the last report. A lot of those came from the interior, and you have to think like, are they coming from the forestry sector, the manufacturing sector, steel, etc., or yeah, how are we going to get out of this hole?
And then we look at this real GDP. And you and I have talked about this many, many times. Real GDP per capita in Canada here, and we got this little graphic here that Rommel can put up here, showing that Canada, like in 10 years, is actually it's around 0.5%. It's like at the bottom. It's if you want to find Canada, it's at the bottom. It's like right at the bottom, like the Friendly Giant would say. Look way, 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 way down there, and you'll find Canada below Mexico.
And I wish at this point I could give like some magical hope to all of those listeners out there. But unfortunately, we see the predictions for Canada actually from 2020 to 2030 to 2040 to 2050 staying in that dismal state and staying and actually decreasing. So right now, I mean, even external agencies are not predicting any hope in sight.
And BC not doing well on its own. Never mind Canada. Not a good picture here in British Columbia and in Canada, right, for the economy. Let's move on to the election, though, and we'll first start in our local riding here because 338 is predicting a toss-up in what would typically be a conservative type riding. Tracy Gray riding with Stephen Fuhr, who was the MP a couple of elections ago. I think when the Trudeau first ran, Stephen Fuhr took that riding.
Yeah, and if we remember correctly, there were the riding rejigging of all of the boundaries. This one was really affected. It was interesting and kind of surprising to me that Tracy chose to take on this new riding rather than stay in the other riding, which had Lake Country, Coldstream, Vernon, and then I think forgive me, I don't remember the exact name of that particular riding, but it's the one that goes to Vernon. But it was interesting to me that she didn't choose that one. That one is much more of a conservative stronghold, and definitely, 338 is noting that. This new Kelowna riding is going to be tougher for Tracy to win. It has, far more of the lower polls. And if we remember, Tracy in the last election, if you added up the NDP and the Liberal vote, she just won by a small margin. Whereas if you took those two, I think the NDP in the last election got 16%. And so I think that she does have more of a fight on her hands, especially if we keep seeing former NDP candidates saying, pitch your support behind the Liberals. That's what we're seeing nationally is the NDP vote is absolutely collapsing. And without a strong NDP, it's difficult for Conservatives to win.
Yeah, it's just amazing how Jagmeet Singh has just basically destroyed his own party. It's just like he almost wants to implode it to become part of the Liberals. It just makes no sense to me at all. But
I know we want to focus on only like factual and real news, but I'm going to delve into the tin hat here a little bit. But there was some speculation that was circulating online that there was actually an agreement that Jagmeet was going to like toss the election and throw it, and they were using some of his Jagmeet's events as proof of this. And I don't know if you saw yesterday, but I was watching on the National last night, and they covered, Jagmeet is having a coffee talk, and I swear there were 8 people there, like 8 people in that. Like you got to imagine if Carney showed up to DeVille here on Bernard, you got to imagine that there's going to be like throngs of people trying to get in there. And if Pierre Poilievre ended up at Bright Jenny, I mean, they wouldn't have, it'd be all over the parking lots, according to, the types of crowds that he's drawing right now. So like, there is some, possibility that there's some truth to that because man, he is not campaigning for a third time leader. Like he should be down on this. And like, I don't get the like whole like vibe of his outfits. Like he's like sweaters. Like there was a whole meme series on X where it was
the OnlyFans girl. Like what?
Like who did that to him? But like, what sweater is he going to wear and which OnlyFan is he going to like? That does not seem like a very well oiled,
Maybe,
candidate.
maybe he has Gerald Butts helping with his campaign.
Well, there's something going on there because it certainly doesn't add up. That's for sure.
You
That's
know,
for sure.
the only person getting less people at an outing is Chrystia Freeland. Like I've seen some of her outings, and she's got like one or two people there, I think. And when her kickoff, she had two people there holding about 12 flags each, and I think they were just happened to be walking by.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting because you've got Melanie Jolie who said, "I'm suspending my campaign for right now because I have to do important things for the government and attend the security conference." And I'm like, "Whoa! Like you better be boots on the ground." And this is going to be a really interesting election because I don't see the boots on the ground as strongly as I do with the conservatives right now. So I always say politics is a ground game. It's not really about what the media says, and it's about eyeballs and handshakes. And right now, the conservatives are definitely winning when it comes to how many hands are being shook and how many eyeballs are being seen.
I think they're putting all their stock into Mark Carney because I think most of the Liberals still have a lot of, I would say, smell left over them from Trudeau, in that, like Chrystia Freeland, Stephen Gibault, Melanie Jolie, all these people definitely still wear a lot of that, and they should. They should be responsible for the last 10 years. They had the wheel for 10 years. They should be held responsible for it.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jim, and I do think that it'll be really interesting if a new face is enough. I thought it was incredibly strategic that Pierre Poilievre announced that he was going to bring in a new tax code that will help to tax the ultra wealthy, and then utilizing Mark Carney's picture on a lot of those things. I think it's great that he is drawing attention to the tax evasion that Carney has been not just accused of, proven, because there's actual numbers out there, and the U.S. is taking Brookfield to task on that. The U.S. does not take that lightly. The U.S. goes after those that are trying to avoid paying taxes. So it would be interesting to see what happens there. But Canada has largely just been very quiet about it. So, the tax code needs to be done. And I love that Pierre is actually talking about it and willing to do it. We have one of the most complicated tax codes. And I shouldn't say any of this because I'm sitting next to an accountant who could say way more about it. But I do appreciate that he's doing it. And I think it's fairly savvy from a political perspective to do it with Mark Carney's face attached to it.
Believe it or not, Jean Chrétien was my political hero or whatever, and I thought I was like liberal center. And then the two parties have flipped, though. Do you mean conservatives are going after billionaires? Conservatives are going after billionaires in tax code, and supporting workers and like the hardworking Canadians. And the liberals are the tax dodgers, right? And have elitist agendas that serve the few at the expense of the many. If we look at the wealth gap over the past 10 years, and one of the points I try to make to people is that if you've had the wheel for 10 years, doesn't matter if you're running a company, doesn't matter if you're running the country or whatever, even the family, if you've had the wheel for 10 years and the situation is bleak, that's your responsibility. You have to take responsibility for that. And Mark Carney saying he's new to this game, he was in the shadows as the economic advisor. And what's the worst thing that's going on in Canada right now? The economy. He's in the shadows. Now he's at the front because the leader that was supposedly getting his economic advice from the guy that was in the shadows is just become so toxic they had to get a different face for the party. But it's the same group of people, the exact same group of people, and the same cabinet, same agenda, Bill 69, all those things are exactly the same. And they're relying on this window dressing, and it's being supported by a lot of the media, but some of the media actually starting to ask some real questions, but will it be enough, before, and the last point I'll make is, if we look at the crowds, we're going to see some crowds here in a second, that are showing up at Pierre Poilievre. It's the young people, the youth, the middle class, and the the middle-aged people. And at Carney's, it looks like we're at an old folks' home.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was very striking was, we've heard a lot in this election about the polls reading for women. And I've been looking through those crowds and really looking for women. And I would say that the last three crowds that I've seen attracted by Pierre Poilievre, I would say are dominated by females, whereas Carney's crowds are, I would say, more male dominated. So I don't know where the polls are getting the numbers for. It's just not showing up in those crowds that are being drawn. I do think also one of the most powerful things I've heard was Stephen Harper, who is an incredible economist. He was a reluctant leader. He kind of begrudgingly became the leader of the newly amalgamated Conservative Party of Canada. And his endorsement last night was, I thought, brilliant. Basically saying, hey, look, both of these men have worked for me. And I will say to you, the one I'm endorsing, for the job, and the best man for the job is Pierre Poilievre. I thought that was an exceptional endorsement and very powerful in front of the crowd that was there in Edmonton.
Yeah, we played that in the really big show this morning, and I said that Stephen Harper found his sense of humor. He had it here in 2019, though, too, because he was always accused of being no sense of humor, right?
He is the funniest guy. I don't know if you remember that Kelowna Chamber hosted an event with him as well.
Yeah, I was there, too, yeah.
And oh my goodness, he is so funny. Yeah. He's got such a humor, but definitely did not come through when he was prime minister. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, he was very stiff, and that was he was very. I guess he took his job very seriously. But when he spoke at Level Up, sense of humor. When he spoke at the Chamber, sense of humor. And and last night, obviously, that was a real kind of like a genuine kind of introduction for sure, right? And funny. Right.
And absolutely. And I think that Stephen Harper, the one thing I will say is that he's also a brilliant politician and strategist. He spoke last night as well, just about the youth. And Pierre has been really big on the youth and that next generation. And I don't know, I've got 5 kids between the ages of 23 and 28 or 29. Sorry, his birthday was last Thursday, but 23 and 29. And I will honestly say that most of them are talking about leaving Canada. If they can't, if things continue on the same trajectory that they're on right now. And for me as a mom, there's nothing more disheartening than to hear that my kids can't see their future here.
Do we have that clip, Rommel, for when Mark Carney dissed Danielle Smith? And we're going to play this clip here.
Hit them again in the auto sector. We have retaliatory tariffs on them. We just hit them again in the auto sector. We're fighting them on Fox News, which is what they understand. We're sending Doug Ford onto Fox News to show them that we're not messing around up here. And we're going to send Danielle next. Maybe we won't send Danielle. No, maybe we won't. We won't send Danielle. We're going to keep her. No, that's a bad idea. Forget. Strike that. Just ignore that back there. So we got that, and we're fighting them in the courts, But and we will win. We will win eventually on those fronts.
Hey, he goes on to slag her one more time, and then he talks about how Canada, and the mic cut there, almost like they cut it for him. It says, we're going to create the energy green superpower. I think they wanted to cut out the word green. And then he made him say it again. But twice he slagged Danielle Smith. At the same time, the Liberals stand up there and says, we all have to work together. We can't have any dissent. And then they go ahead and they slag her twice there. And then Danielle actually retorted to that and says that, Mark Carney obviously doesn't like strong women, and neither does Justin Trudeau, which we've seen evidence of that as well.
Yeah. This was really disheartening. I watched on CBC the Power in Politics show yesterday. Not only were the Conservatives going after Carney on this particular show, but also his own left of center Liberals. Those commentators were also saying this is a bad look for Carney. Number one, he's not very funny. He comes off very arrogant, very condescending. Number two, he talks about Premier Ford, but he talks about Danielle. He refers to her as a first name rather than as a last name. He talks about sending in Doug Ford to go on to Fox News, Premier Ford on Fox News. Like all of that is brutal for unity. It's brutal for Canadians. It's not a good look, and it really, for all of the unity talk that we've heard, I haven't seen it. And when he's off the cuff and when he's more candid is when we're seeing more of that disunity leak. The other thing that I found very alarming about this particular performance was his war rhetoric. I think that's very dangerous right now. I don't think we need to go to war with the states at all. I think that if you look at what China is doing and what China is receiving, I think that would be much more of the same for Canada. We need to rebuild a stronger economy outside of the US and ignore the US. Let the bully just bark in his own corner. The whole finally he comes clean. It's a green energy superpower rather than, or clean energy superpower rather than actually just an energy superpower.
Yeah. I think that was very telling. Very, very telling, that
on
moment.
CBC yesterday, you've got Rachel Siegel that basically took apart. It was an interesting day. You've got Jugmeat in a coffee shop. You've got Carney that is in a park announcing, free camping, and then you've got Pierre in front of, a tank or a pipeline, and in Edmonton talking about how he's going to, unleash the resource sector. In a time when people are very concerned about the economy, very concerned about their paychecks, what better way to ignite them than to talk about what you're going to do for our economy?
Yeah, they did announce a bunch of new parks too. And if you want to be funny about it, you'd say it was at the Park of Alberta and the Park of Saskatchewan, so they can't do anything in those two provinces. Make Fort Mac a big park. It's just even CBC went after him for this park things. They said, here's Poilievre with a plan, kind of like Harper had a plan for energy and a plan for our resources. And then Mark Carney's talking about free park passes for the summer and building new parks. And it's just not much in it for the economy. It's more about, again, more virtue signaling and identity politics that are going on. And I think that the stuff that was done with Danielle Smith there, they used to do political analysts, especially in the States. They would do whole things on political analysts talking about body posture, body mechanics, and how you talk and all that stuff. And you would say Mark Carney with women doesn't really come across very well. We've seen it with Rosie Barton when he was talking to a couple of reporters, another one from the Globe and Mail. And then, the disrespect, like you said, he calls Premier Ford and then Danielle Smith, and then making fun of her.
It was Danielle.
Yeah. So it's a different way. And then even if you watch the walking off the plane and the way that Poilievre walks with his wife, and it's just if you want to look at body language, then there's people that make a living off of that. We should ask them to come and take a quick look.
Yeah, and I was actually going to bring up the same point. Look at them with their wives. Look at how they are treated. Look at how they are, Carney's wife, despite having, all of her accolades, and I think that they met at Oxford or Yale. I can't remember which one.
Oxford, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, she walks five steps behind him, whereas Anna's literally on the stage, introducing Poilievre. They are, going for a walk, and he's recording a video about the Sea-Doo story. There's just a very different and very tender kind of interaction that those two have that Carney does not have with his wife. So
I think it's very, yeah. No, go ahead.
And for me, it echoes how those two have treated women in and amongst them.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair to both of them, one describes himself as actually verbalized it himself as a global elitist, and then one is verbalized himself as somebody that is, living the Canadian dream from nothing to building yourself up, and you can be anything you want to be. And the story of both him and Anita is pretty inspiring. For we have a clip here from the rally last night. I think they say the biggest ever in history, even beating Pierre Trudeau's rallies. And here it is in Edmonton in a warehouse. 17,000 strong, they say. We're going to just play a little clip to show you the size of the crowd. There you go. We did send our reporter down to Penticton to that rally. And that was packed house too, and they were spilled outside too in Penticton in that small rally. So he is attracting large crowds. Even Global, David Atkin on Global said that you got to get there 3 hours early if you want to attend a Pierre Poilievre rally, because he is what they call a rock star.
Yeah. And even yesterday, they were talking about the tailgate parties that were happening outside, that people have been waiting all day in Nisku, really to see him. When I saw that clip, and it might have been a similar one, I can't remember, but I saw the one on social media. I actually said to my husband last night, you have to see this. It almost doesn't look real. Like, it almost looks like someone is trying to fake it. And then you contrast that to what you just showed from Victoria, where, literally Carney looks like it's like a small itty bitty venue where he's like, maybe got 30 or 40 people around him. And maybe there's more, let's call it 100. But the amount of people that are trying to get inside the door. And I think that just belies how many people are at the end of what they can manage, at the end of their cost of living squeeze, and at the end of not feeling that hope. And, I remember in 2008 watching that presidential election, and I saw Obama speak. And when I saw Obama speak, I said that is who will win, because he's the first one to talk about hope. He's the first one to talk about rebuilding. And right now, Pierre owns that message. And
he talks hope, and the other one sells fear.
And it's interesting that Carney, he sells fear, but then when he's on script, he's literally parroting what Pierre Poilievre has said. And it's almost bizarre. It's almost like, wow, like, get your own words, get your own thoughts here. But I think it also speaks to, he's just not up for the task yet.
Why the Edmonton rally is significant in a couple of ways, because Edmonton typically in their provincial election goes NDP or or Liberal, because Carney was going to run in Edmonton. So this is not like a conservative stronghold. Like, Edmonton is the kind of the NDP Liberal hub of Alberta. The rest of Alberta will be blue, including most of Calgary. There's some ridings in Calgary that are definitely more NDP, but Edmonton is the kind of the NDP Liberal stronghold. And look at this rally. Like, they could do that in Calgary. I'd say, in Calgary that's expected, but that's a pretty big thing for Edmonton.
Well, and 338 has it really leaning right now Liberal. So it's very interesting. I think that some of the commentators yesterday were talking about how interesting it was that Pierre went to Edmonton, how they clearly knew what their numbers were going to be, because they're planning these spaces accordingly. And I mean, this is a gigantic crowd. And for, an area location that's going to veer Liberal, I'd be shocked with that amount of momentum, because you got to think all of those 15,000 people are going to go and tell two friends and go and tell two friends and go and tell two friends. And that type of an environment's pretty electric. And I want to say, like, the last one that I saw do this really well was Justin Trudeau. I mean, he came, and I remember when he came to Kelowna and was down at City Park, and all of a sudden there's like social media that was all around there, like going, he's down at City Park. And soon enough, there was a crowd that had developed, in a fairly significant crowd. So definitely feel like Pierre is the one that, that's creating that chatter and that momentum right now.
The last topic for today, unless you have something else you want to talk about, is just this: the Chinese interference in our election. And this is the Holly Doan Blacklock story. The China bots hail Mark Carney as rock star. And it was interesting to see how some of the media outlets kind of like played this, because when it first came out, it was we're going to play this clip here from CBC first, so we'll just play this clip real quick.
Perceptions were very positive headlines about Mark Carney, right? Rock star, banker, strong PM to deal with the U.S. There were some others that were more critical, but the ones that have really sort of surfaced in this, it's feeding the, China likes the liberal sort of social media arguments. What do you make of what we saw today from this?
Yeah, on balance, it looks like they were trying to put a thumb on the scale for the Liberals and for Mark Carney, and we should all be concerned about that. Everybody should be concerned about that.
You were so kind in your intro, Jim, because I would have said I was disgusted by how the mainstream media actually portrayed that. In fact, when I was first reading the headlines yesterday afternoon and looking at that, I had to go to the original article and find, and I'm like, wait, none of these headlines are reading correctly. Like, no, they're actually promoting Carney. Not, it looked like, the way that the headlines were all
You put that
read.
CTV one up there, Rommel. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was no, not that one. That's the Toronto Sun, and then the next. No, keep going. No, there you go. CTV, and it's like the mainstream media here. CTV with Task Force Detects Chinese Information Operation targeting Carney, and then CBC, the next one here, and then the Global News. There you go. You can probably take those off now. But yeah, so it made it. And then Reuters, of course. Let's put Reuters up there real quick. Because Reuters is like, like all across, even internationally. Yeah, so you can take those. So those headlines made it look like that he was the victim of this Chinese interference. And then some of the analysts are talking now and saying, like, all his close ties with China, the borrowing of money, his meetings with China, all these things are starting to, there needs to be serious questions asked. He was questioned about it today, and he kind of bumbled through an answer. But the questions they should ask is, aren't you concerned that Canadians are seeing this connection between Brookfield Asset Management, Mark Carney, and China? And then we had a candidate that was had to be removed because of Chinese interference. And then there's the one they're replacing with also has some links. It doesn't make any sense at all. So why this isn't the top story?
I want to go to one step further. In the clip that you played with Carney's meet and greet, he's talking about the auto sector. We have to remember that he has completely ignored the counter tariffs that China has put on our prairie provinces, which Scott Moe has been going ballistic over. He has completely ignored them, to our detriment. So in all cases, he has supported the elite in Toronto and in Ontario, but has completely ignored the prairie provinces, and largely, I think, because of his ties to China. I think that Canadians should be very concerned, and we need to start asking some serious questions. The other reason is because our greatest ally in terms of our national security, not in terms of our economy right now, is still the United States. And right now, the United States and China are not getting along. The last thing we want to do is position ourselves as a Chinese ally. So for us, I mean, this reeked yesterday of foreign interference that we have been warned about. And as an MLA, I was privileged to have a briefing with CSIS. This is exactly the situation that they warned us about in terms of how China tries to influence, because a lot of individuals who are not able to speak English are on WeChat, and these channels that are being monitored are oftentimes in Chinese and are very difficult to refute.
Yeah, and we just did a story, Holly Doan's Blacklock story too, where it shows many Canadian universities have been infiltrated by Chinese operatives, agents. And then there was a report from Kash Patel from the FBI stating that after they've tightened the screws on the southern border, the Chinese and the Russians are working very, concentrating their efforts on the Canadian border. So we really have to be aware of what's going on. And I don't think that we are right now. I don't think that we're really cognizant of that, because here we know that there's Chinese agents working on universities. There's that Wuhan lab thing, that back to the Winnipeg thing. There's a bunch of Chinese interference in our election thing. And then this, and it's just kind of brushed off as oh, it doesn't really matter. There has to be a reason that the Chinese government wants the Liberals in power.
And the Chinese government is using very legal channels to influence in other countries, and not just influence, but infiltrate. The interview between Brian Lilly from the Toronto Star and Steve Bannon said exactly that you guys, Canadians, wake up. There is a huge issue going on here. You have been infiltrated to a much larger extent than the US, all through legal channels, all through the channels that we've opened for foreigners to come in, whether that's buying companies, buying our natural resources, how many mines, how many acres of farming, of farmland, how many oil and gas companies are owned by Chinese entities. And, this just really, really reeks of more of the same. And I think that Canadians are right to pay attention and right to push back against a candidate that is supported by the Chinese.
And that's why that disclosure is oh so important, right? Getting that disclosure. You know what I mean? Like that, you know what I mean? Because and even for what Brookfield owns, because they're being called out on so many violations throughout the world for their operations, right? I mean, I worked for a public company that was actually sold to a Chinese company, a nickel mine in northern Manitoba. So they do buy up assets that nobody talks about, right? So it's definitely a huge concern here, and something that we should look at. And then one last point I want to make on, you talked about the auto sector, and I think if I get to ask a question, I'm going to try and ask the question is, will they get rid of the EV mandate? Because there is no auto sector in Canada unless they dump the EV mandate. That's what people don't realize. Ford is already talking. Ford is already saying we have excess capacity in the United States. We're going to bring back the jobs to the US. Ford and GM and Stellantis don't make money selling EVs. That's just the plain facts. They don't make money. They almost lose half as much as the cost of the vehicle. So where are they going to go? Where they're going to get penalized starting in 2026 for selling gas cars.
Agreed. It needs to go. And I think that we are, again, we're going to penalize ourselves. We're going to make it more expensive for the consumer. And I was listening to someone this morning on the AM 1150, and, they were talking about how, how carbon tax adversely affected the consumer. And, feels like, yeah, but wait, we need to protect our environment. We need to do the right thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The EV mandates and the carbon tax actually are known to affect those that are in rural, remote locations in greater amount, those that are female, single parents, those that, rely on their vehicles for their jobs and for their security. And so it adversely affects those individuals, and these mandates have to go. Do we want people to choose? Absolutely. But in order to choose, then make them less expensive, because people will choose whichever is less expensive and whichever is easier to use. Right now, I could tell you stories about Fortis not having enough power, and not having enough power for housing, not having enough power for the electrification goals. So we're in a really scary state if these EV mandates continue.
I think it's even much more of a common sense equation for Ford, GM, and Stellantis, because there is no Canadian auto market. I mean, Canadians need to know there is no Canadian auto market. Bricklin made Canadian autos, right? In 1974 to 1975, and they made about under 3,000 of those cars. All the other automakers are either American automakers or Japanese automakers that make our cars here. And they're going to take them to the US because there is no EV mandate, because they can operate there more economically if we continue this EV mandate. Because starting in 2026, I think it's a 20% penalty if you sell a gas car. And then up to, then it gets to like 100%. So they can still make and sell them. We put our own tariffs on them. We put our own tariffs on these vehicles. And you tell me Ford, Jim Farley, great guy, actually, he's pretty open and honest. They've got excess capacity in the United States. And if he can make and build a Ford cheaper in the United States,
he will.
Common sense says Stellantis has already said they're going to do it. They've closed their factories in Mexico and Canada because they're making decisions. Stellantis in trouble in general, period. But Ford, still a very healthy company, as is GM. But they're going to make decisions based on what's best for their companies. And it isn't about the EV mandates.
No.
For them.
No. Agreed.
And if you want an electric car maker, the Liberals already burnt down Tesla. You know what I mean? They don't want anything to do with Tesla. So what do they have left, right? They're going to have to invite the Chinese automakers in, which they put 100% tariffs on.
Yeah, they've already soured that.
Well, our shows always go over, but it's great. It's always great having you, Renee. And we're going to do the platform stuff pretty quick here. We're going to actually go through the platforms. We've got somebody that's going to join us as well. a young man that was an NDP candidate once, and now he's supporting the Liberals. So he'll give us the other side of that spectrum. And then we're going to be here April 28th for the decision, and then we'll be here till the decision is made.
Yeah, we'll be there till the bitter end.
Right to the bitter end. Anyway, thank you, Renee. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of the week, and we're back next Wednesday with Beyond the Ballot. And we do thank you for watching Now Media.